And I think it really start off with my journey, and I think it started off fairly before I joined narrative as well, and I think as a child itself, because there was a lot of emphasis I would always place on communication and relationships. And I strongly believe that identity is socially constructed. And I would still remember, as a child also I'd get into these arguments and probably discussions with my friends saying that, it's important to communicate. It's important to express what you're feeling. And I think it was way, early in my life also. And I strongly believe that identity is socially constructed. Where, there's so many experiences, people in your life also adds to who you are. And I can know that because from the voice of the kind of messages I would get as a child, somewhere shaped who I was also. But as experiences changed, people changed also, people came into my life, I became a different person. And there were also people who were not so significant in my life. There were people probably I didn't even like them so much, but the voices stayed. And even those memories also, if I have to look back, were so vivid. And I was wondering that, if that's how, and I have so much of emphasis on communication, it should be really easy for me to talk about what people would think. And I think started off when we did remembering map and narrative therapy. And I struggled. I really struggled. My map was actually like this. I couldn't write why they love me. And it really got me thinking, I have so many people, and there were many more names than what is there on the slide right now. There were so many names and I just couldn't write. I couldn't see what my parents would tell about me. And this is coming from a close-knit family and believing in all this as well. So what I told them, and I think most of you know that, I told them that, I have an assignment to my family and said that you have to tell me why you love me. So the cutest way is like, I have to ask them. And this is some of the responses that I got. And so Malik is my husband, I'm sure all of you know about him. Mom and dad are my parents. Anaya is my 11-year-old niece. Ma, Papa and my in-laws. My Didi is my sister. And it was very heartwarming. Just to know about things that people observe as well. And I think what it made possible for me that, it reinforced certain things that I was doing for them, which was not even intentional, but it just became so much more visible. It strengthened my relationships, be it with my niece, my in-laws, things that I noticed. I think somewhere my behavior towards them also changed because I know that they value what I do as well. So it became a lot more visible. It's really strengthened my preferred identity and also made it possible for me to add other elements to my identity also which are not so visible back then. Because the significance of my action became so much more visible. And they added voices to my values, to my principles, to my hopes also. The fact that work is important for me. And that became much more visible because I was also getting that kind of support from those voices as well. When my experience was so enriching and so heartwarming, it really got me thinking, how would it be if I were to introduce this map in my work as well? Initially it started just to practice because we were learning here, and I would just take that back into my practices. But then it just started happening, because I think somewhere, I think that's what Jay made very visible for me during supervision also, that because people are so important in my life and communication is so important, it just came out, what would people say, who are these people, and those conversations started happening as it is. So if I have to start talking about my work, this is my first client I'm presenting. I have changed the names here for the reason of confidentiality. And he is a 67-year-old, and I've showed him on a cycle because that used to be his primary mode of transport as well. This would even result in some kind of fights also with his sons, why do you have to ride a bicycle on the road, it's not good for you. So he was 67 years old and he was referred by his son for counseling. And he said that my father is abusive towards my mother and I want you to counsel him. And that really got me stuck. How do I talk about someone, because he's a perpetrator coming in and talk about abuse and he has no context. Because of what was told to him that, there is some person from my company who wants to meet you. Now I have to really broach the topic of abuse, talk about what gets him doing this and how can we work around that. And then it happened that I chose to go along the remembering. And I asked him to, and so in the first 20 minutes he was just talking about his work. And that made it really difficult for me because there was no mention of relationships also, and somewhere that I had to get the conversation started. So I asked him to write about people that you love. And this was really the turning point in the session. Because when he said that and reflecting on what he had written, he had not mentioned his wife's name. And then he said that you must be, and it's not even that I had to ask that, that just became so much more visible for him. And he said that you must be wondering why my wife's name is not there. because now you have a very strained relationship. And then there was a conversation around that, what made it possible for the strain in the relationship to really come in. And he said, there are times I used to hit her, and now my son said that this is not okay. So now she's also stopped talking to me as well. And then there was a conversation about, how did, what made you really, raise your hand or not. It's like, my mother used to say this. My mother would say that, कि अपनी बीवी को हमेशा दिल में रखना, लेकिन डरा के रखना. And that was the idea that was really governing his actions. And then there was a conversation around, where, when it was the first time he saw that, hitting is okay. And then after some bit of conversation, he said that, it was the first time I saw my father hitting my mother. And when I was 13 years old, and the memory was very vivid. He said that on that day, mummy रोई थी और किसी ने बाजरे का रोटी भी नहीं खाया था. So to remember the details of that also is so vivid. And then there was a conversation, how did the 13 साल के हेमंत को कैसा लगा? The 13 साल के हेमंत को अच्छा नहीं लगा. पापा को नहीं मारना चाहिए था. But I couldn't do it. So to really bring in those voices of a 13-year-old Hemant in the session really made it possible to look at the consequence of his actions also. And I think that remembering really made that possible for me. Yeah. Then there was another client, Subhash. He came in for a session, he's 27 years old, and came in for a session feeling that the two people in his life are very important. His mother and his girlfriend. And they're really significant figures, but he feels like the suffocation really comes in those relationships because the ideas of success is very different. For them, ideal success is more about money. And for him, it's about achieving his goals, that he's really far ahead as compared to his peers, and that there used to be a lot of conflict around those things as well. And during the work, so there was a time, there was also Jennifer Lopez's voice also coming in the session because he was listening to one of the interviews and he stood up for himself. And he said, what made it possible? Because Jennifer Lopez said, you need to give yourself priority. And then he stood up for himself. So then I asked him, so who wouldn't be surprised that you stood up for yourself? And he said that God wouldn't be surprised I stood up for myself. Because he guides me and tells me what is right. And he spoke about his conversation that he'll have with God as well. Even as a child, he just opened the Bible and opened any verse and he knows that there is a message that he's getting from God at that point in time. And those conversations were something which were very important for him. And he said, what is it about you that makes God guide you? And he said, I think I'm God's favorite son. So where that acceptance, the belongingness was so strong from those relationships, I think it made it possible to really have a conversation about God at that time, and then that acceptance that who he is okay. And for me, that was, and I think I've shared it with the entire group also during reflections, that to have a conversation about God for 40 minutes is not something I could imagine myself doing, because I don't have that kind of relationship with God. So I think just to be able to give that person the agency, it's okay to make those choices and go along with the kind of relationship they have, I think this made it possible. Third client, Soumya. She has been a survivor of abuse throughout. Father was alcohol dependent, and she has seen a lot of fights. Father hitting mother. Then there was also she got married. She also experienced marital rape as well. And so there were a lot of stories, and I have used remembering with her in on multiple occasions to really bring in those voices of uncle who passed away, or to really showcase the skills also. But what I'll talk about is the two-way influence that I noticed, because that was something which was very different. And so we spoke about the time when father would come back home and there would be a lot of fear around her. So he said, what would she do? She said, I'll go under the bed and read Rabindranath Tagore's stories. Because that's what made it possible for me to distract myself and switch off from what was happening around me. And then there was a conversation about, how would Rabindranath Tagore feel the fact that he could help me through all this. And she said that Rabindranath Tagore would feel very happy that his stories could help me when I was scared and could distract me from the abuse that was happening around me. And also I know the fact that Rabindranath Tagore has so much of influence on you. How do you think you may have influenced Rabindranath Tagore's life? And he said probably make it possible for him to write more stories also. And when we have this conversation now, and also he thinks that I'm mad. And I think Ravi has always said that sometimes possibilities are made possible in insanity and madness also. And I think those possibilities are becoming more and more visible to me in my practice as well. This is the last client I'll be sharing about. So she has again been a survivor. She's experienced a lot of abuse, where in her own family, mother had slept with the grandfather. Father got to know about this, became very suspicious of her, told her just to wear white clothes. And also there'll be a lot of hitting and fighting. If she was late for 5 minutes, also she'll be just thrown against the wall. A lot of those things. She was asked to leave the house just 1 week before marriage. That is, she even attempted suicide as well. And now she's married. She's got a lovely family, very loving husband. But the constant message that she was getting that she was not a good human being. And I was hearing something else altogether. And there was a lot of conflict. And I asked her that, she said, I've come in for a session because I just don't feel fine. I don't know what it is, but I don't feel fine right now. And they say, no, okay, so if you are, this feeling fine comes in, what will your world look like? And if you can see this, I don't know if you can see this, she started saying about in terms of work, family, and she said that I want, feeling fine will be there, I want a normal life. And what would normal look like? Having parents. And then she wrote about parents, and then she struck it off. So there was a lot of confusion, a lot of conflict also coming in whether I want my parents or I don't want my parents in my life. Friends, money. But she wanted these people, but didn't really know how she can really have them also, because right now she's not talking to them. There was also a lot of things that, people that and when we spoke about love, people who are there, so she said, my husband's going to be there for me. And I don't know that people would be there for me always or not. So the fact that there's no certainty, people are there, will they ever be there for me? So we started talking about people that you love. And she made this. So she wrote a lot of people, but she said that I know they are there, but I only know my husband is going to be there for me, but I know other people will be there for me. So I said, how would it be if you were to ask these people, why do you think that you're a good human being? And a lot of stories came out. I wish I could have shown all that, but there was no time. But all these people wrote back and back that, and what made it possible for her to look at that fact, and I again asked the question, how many people would be there for and there was a confidence that, people she was underlined with red, that these people are going to love me back. That certainty came in also. Even some of the people who did not write back, she knew that they would still be there. So I think that conversation became possible, that she could add more voices also, and the fact that she's a good human being. And a lot of stories of care and honesty and standing up really came about. And when we asked, how have you learned all these things? She said, I learned honesty from my dad, I learned care from my mom. Because I never got it. And because the story was so much richer, and I think what really made it possible to see the relationship where abuse is present from a very different lens. To really renegotiate the space that you can still have them in your life, which is very important for her, but probably holding on to the values that she has learned. To have a part of it that she wants to really choose. So I think through all this, and I think counseling supervision of Jay and Anjul ask him, how do you know that you have to use remembering? What is it that you're really looking for? So I think whenever they start talking, clients start talking about people that they love, they respect, or vice versa also, I think I know there's an opening where I can get people, I can get voices. Or when probably they're discussing about coping, or something they may have done in coping in certain situations also, it gives another possibility to get those people, those characters, writers involved also. And I think what added advantage it had was that it made it possible to see that there's something which are more passive ways of coping and actually active ways of responding as well. The possibility for them to do it again really strengthened. So it really adds to the skill set also that they may have. And also the question, who wouldn't be surprised, who would know, and the like. So a more specific question in getting people in those conversations. So what remembering have really made possible for me as a therapist to deal with stuckness when I don't know how to really initiate a difficult conversation also, and I don't know, I think getting voices made it easy because it's also a very non-threatening way of probably having a conversation. Having a conversation about relationship with God or anything from where I don't have personal resonance with, but people have, I think it made it easy for me to have this conversation, and those questions really directed my conversations as well. Adding voices when they are done. To add voice of writers like for this client, she also wrote about Zach, who's a dog. To really have a conversation, what does Zach say about you? So to have those kind of conversations, that's something which is very new to me. I've never done that in my work with clients. Or even voice of your once younger self as well. And finally, strengthening clients' preferred identity, skills, values. So there have been a lot of other work also I've done using remembering with students in terms of when they're not able to study, what things that they're doing, the fact they're taking a stand, and then to really bring in those voices and make those skills really visible. And I think only remembering has made that possible for me. So what I really believe that there are no limitations. I think they live only in our mind in terms of how a therapy has to look like, and I think it has somewhere broken the discourse of what a therapy is, what kind of question you need to ask, what a therapist looks like also. I think if you use our imaginations, which probably narrative has given me, to be able to be creative, use characters, use cartoons, and I think everything has meaning, possibilities become limitless. Thank you.